Shrink from many different speakers for various reasons. We have Ambassador Ross in his way to this panel, but we have very distinguished two speakers with us here right now. We have Mr. Alex Vatanka, thank you. And he is Senior Fellow and the Founding Director of the Iran Program at the Middle East Institute. And also we have our friend here, Dr. Anas Azizi. He's an author, historian, and postdoctoral associate and lecturer at Yale University. And so we will discuss this afternoon the issue of Israel and Iran, unpacking and the implication of the 12-day war. Okay. Over the past months, the conflict has not only reshaped the security landscape in the Middle East, but also sent shockwave across the global politics, energy markets, and regional alliances. What began as a rapid acceleration has now left us with urgent question about what's going to happen next, the role of proxy forces and humanitarian toll, and how the US and the international community should recalibrate these strategies to save the region. Today, we will explore what is the short but intense war means for Israel, Iran, and the wider region, and the future of diplomacy and conflict prevention. Without further ado, I would like to start with Mr. Vatanka to give his remarks, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks.
Please welcome him with me.
Thank you. Can I borrow you? Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay? This is how I hold it? Great. Well, it's a pleasure. Thanks to the organizers for having me. With Zaina and Arash and others are going to join us. I know Arash just told me before he's going to focus more in terms of what Iran is as a country on the question of Israel. What I'm going to do is take a few moments, and I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know. But I just want to lay the ground in terms of where we are in this Iranian-Israeli conflict right now, as I see it as an analyst sitting here in Washington, D.C. And hopefully that will give us some different angles we can explore in terms of going forward. In terms of immediate impact, again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but the 12-day war was clearly a wake-up call for the regime. I have gone as far as saying they've never experienced anything like it before. I would probably argue that this was a bigger shock in some ways than the invasion of Iraq in September of 1980. So this is pretty big when you look at the totality of the history of the Islamic Republic for about half a century. The air defenses were exposed to be weak. There's an incapacity to defend their nuclear sites that they've spent billions of dollars building up for the last 25 years. The other real main issue for analysts like myself is the massive infiltration of the Iranian regime. I mean, this is happening from the top down, and it's a problem that's going to stay with him for some time. You've seen dozens and dozens executed, but this is not going to be a problem that's going to go away. It shows you something about the extent of infiltration, and I think the regime really has a big problem on its hands. Again, if we want to talk about the real problem, the problem there is a regime that's lost its way with its own people. The contract with the people is totally lost. And we saw that with a mixed reaction of the population. Again, I don't want to exaggerate how the Iranian public reacted, but there were certainly videos out there showing in some certain instances folks celebrating, if you will, Israeli attacks on cities like Tehran and so on. That should be an alarm going off for the regime leadership. The other thing that really stood out is, where were the proxies? Iran has spent so much money and time in recent decades building up the so-called proxy network. Where were they? From Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Houthis. Well, the Houthis probably did that more than anybody else. But my overall take was the proxy network, the forward defense strategy. Let's fight them out there so we don't have to fight them on Iranian soil. Didn't really work out for the regime. So, lessons going forward. Look, we know what happened just the last few days. Iran has not given up its enrichment. It's not giving up its missile program. It's saying that it will not come down on its knees and sign a surrender, if you will. So that is where we are right now. We also have people like Ali Larijani, the head of the Supreme National Security Council, traveling around the region saying Iran will not give up on the likes of Hezbollah. Again, pretty telling where we should be expecting as far as this regime's big trajectory is concerned. One thing that should be alarming all of us is this notion, increasingly sort of prevalent in Iranian society, that, you know what, we survived this war and we will survive similar rounds of war. And I mean, to me, and I think the majority of Iranians probably, but also folks in the United States in the West, this idea that they can have lots of rounds of war going forward, that's scary. But that's exactly where I think the sentiment is in parts of the Iranian regime right now. Khamenei, the supreme leader, has put so much energy in his anti-Americanism since 1989 that for him to give up, I mean, some folks in Washington, D.C. might be expecting that Ali Khamenei is going to send his foreign minister Abbas Araghchi somewhere in Europe and sign on the dotted line that says Iran gives up its right to enrich uranium. As much as we want to see it happen, it's not going to happen. Again, I think most of you probably would agree with me when I say he would rather die than give up the right to enrichment. He would rather take the country to war than give up enrichment. So that's where I see Khamenei being at right now. There is a factional split of sorts inside the Iranian regime. People like Masoud Pezeshkian, the president, is, reportedly engaged in all sorts of fights with the more hardcore elements, people like Saeed Jalili and others in the regime. I would say much of that is noise. We can spend, as analysts, studying the fight between the so-called pragmatic forces and hardliners, but really the two centers of power, in my mind, the office of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and the generals and the Revolutionary Guards, are pretty much hand in hand. On the core issues, I don't see much of a daylight between the two of them. And that to me is the big headline that I take away. Look, they've made some major adjustments in some ways. For example, the creation or recreation, I should say, of the Defense Council, something they had back in the 1980s, been recreated. Does the creation of Defense Council mean that the Islamic Republic of Iran is getting ready to essentially change course? Again, I go back to points I made earlier. I don't see that. Defense Council is about coordination in the likely event from their point of view, of more rounds of conflict to come. Okay, so what do we have left then if you're Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, and what are his options? Again, pretty dark assessment or conclusion that I've come to, which is he is willing to take the country to war. The regime as a whole thinks they can survive more rounds of war. The regime as a whole does not think Donald Trump's going to do what George W. Bush did by rolling in 300,000 American troops to invade the country, which means the war is going to be limited to aerial strikes and assassinations, the types of things we saw in June and we've seen earlier. Again, if you're the Islamic Republic of Iran today, that's preferable to giving up some of these core policy preferences that they've had, which is the right to enrich uranium, the right to produce missiles, and so forth. There is this notion out there that Russia and China are going to help Iran. Now, I've been on the very pessimistic side when it comes to what Russia and China can do for the Islamic Republic. I've maintained that line for years. I think Russia and China play Iran as a card to suit their interests. And I don't think that has fundamentally changed. Although I have to say, increasingly, as we see the United States and China and Russia sort of battling it out on a global scale, where we're talking about multipolarity, that really should maybe make us wonder, if you were China, if you were Russia, why would you want the Americans or the Israelis, for that matter, to win or to prevail in terms of their policies when it comes to Iran? In other words, what is it for Beijing or Moscow? Should you not want to have Islamic Republic stand on its 2 feet and not be overwhelmed by the new pressure of sanctions or even rounds of conflict to come? But what can Russia and China do? That's a big question mark. Again, the bottom line for me is Russia and China can do what they have done for a number of years now, which is to help Iran survive, but not do anything to make it thrive. And that's what Iran needs. This is an Iranian society that is extremely tired of its regime that, a long time ago lost its way when it comes to its policy. So I don't know how the Russians and the Chinese can in the long term help them, but I see them in the short term being able to sort of give this leadership, particularly Ali Khamenei and the guards, this sense of security, that the world is at a place right now where our friends, the Russians and the Chinese, are not going to give up on us, and we can maybe withstand the pressure that we're under. I love to talk more about Israel and this policy, which in my view, and again, if you look at my writings for years, I do not for the life of me understand what this fight with Israel is all about. We heard some of the history earlier. But I want to leave that to maybe after Arash's remarks and maybe in the Q&A.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
This is very insightful. Arash, please.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. And thank the organizers, Dr. Marley, and everybody else. It's really a great initiative, and I'm very happy to be a part of it. See, Ambassador Ross has it.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about a very sorry that you entangle.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm going to talk about a sort of very particular aspect of this topic, the implications of the 12-day war and its consequences. If you follow my writings, you know I have a couple of hats. I write about sort of geopolitics and stuff in the Atlantic, but that's not so much of what I want to focus on today. Although in the question and answer, I'm happy to get to those points and what sort of Alex said. But I want to talk a little bit about the anti-Israeli, you can say sort of anti-Zionism, and in fact the anti-Semitism that the Iranian regime, since its foundation in 1979, has moved and has used as a motivating thing. And like how Alex said, you know, for the life of him, he can't understand. It's sort of an interesting point. I think if I would say about its sort of introduction, I think understanding it is difficult from a perspective of national interest, and also it's difficult to square up with meeting sort of ordinary Iranians. Iran is sort of one of the, I would say on average, certainly one of the least sort of anti-Israeli societies you can find in the Middle East, and not just the Middle East actually. I would say anti-Israeli attitudes were not really common in Iranian society. That I grew up, I'm born in 1988, so very much a sort of son of the Islamic Republic. I grew up under it, but precisely because of the sort of dislike that people have for the regime, they really didn't share this anti-Israeli attitudes, or certainly the anti-Semitism that the Iranian regime propagates. Nevertheless, it's not hard to see why it was central to the regime's revolutionary ideology. If you look at different groups that actually helped bring about the 1979 revolution, one of the things they had in common was sort of opposition and derision of Israel, not in different colors, but in the mood of the global 60s, if you will, of the time, right? A pretty sort of pretty a strong opposition to Israel across the board, but certainly by the Islamists, and they baked it into the Islamic Republic, and Khamenei has staked his sort of leadership on it, and he will never give it up personally. Although I do think that this is not true about different factions, and there so maybe we have a little disagreement because I think that there are different factions in the regime who, based on their own material interests, they understand that this is sort of a loser's fight. They're not, unlike Khamenei, they're not ideologues. So they kind of understand that they have to give it up if they want to keep their sort of financial material privileges, and if they want to have a role in the future of Iran, right? They understand that this is kind of silly, it doesn't go anywhere, you know, and they've even sidelined themselves on the Israel question. As you know, recently, when Saudi Arabia and France led this campaign for the recognition of Palestine at the UN, Iran was one of the states that didn't vote for it, which led to a lot of commentary inside Iran saying, you know, what are we doing? We have this, because, of course, Iran didn't do it because its position is the destruction of Israel, not a two-state solution. So, you know, a lot of commentaries in Iranian public press said, you know, it's not clear what Iran is doing. It's taking a position against the Palestinian leadership. Anyways, so there are differences there. But I want to talk about something in particular, speaking of Jews in the Persianate world. For people born my age, 1988, one of the first references, very loud references to Jewish life, to Jews and Jewish life in Iranian public life, was unfortunately a horrific one. And that was a public campaign of the denial of the Holocaust by President Ahmadinejad, this conservative president of Iran. And it was not and is not limited to Ahmadinejad, unlike what they want to say. Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, I believe remains the only head of a state in the world who sort of engages in public denial of the Holocaust repeatedly and clearly. In fact, unfortunately, even some of the more centrist sort of figures of the regime did the same. Ayatollah Rafsanjani was adamant. In fact, Dr. Ziba Kalam is sort of, unfortunately, I don't think he could make it today, but there's a conversation with Dr. Ziba Kalam and Rafsanjani. He interviews him. And Ziba Kalam basically tries to push Rafsanjani to drop Holocaust denial. And Rafsanjani says, continues in his sort of Holocaust denial, unfortunately. So it's not limited to Khamenei, and it's across much regime. It's also not just something that, he says it in one speech. Ahmadinejad, of course, organized very loud Holocaust denial conferences. He invited Holocaust deniers from around the world to Iran. This included David Duke from this country. It included Robert Farisson, if for those who know, it's a very well-known French Holocaust denier who was invited to Iran and came to this conference, published their work. Kayhan newspaper, which is run by the Supreme Leader's office, publishes repeated Holocaust denial. There are Holocaust denial films that are made. This is quite striking because if you look at even different sort of anti-Israel opinions in the world, they know that once you add Holocaust denial to anti-Israelism, you basically lose a lot of your potential allies. So it takes a real degree of ideological rigidity and insistence to actually insist on Holocaust denial, and they've always had that. And they have, by the way, had opportunities to not do this, but they keep doing it. Now, I want to talk about something positive that I'm involved at. So I said when I grew up in Iran, this was very, very common. Of course, it was opposed publicly by a lot of us, Iranian progressives, we opposed our government's I'm of a Muslim background myself, but obviously Iranian Jews were at the forefront of fighting this. The Iranian Jewish communities, leadership opposed it. But a lot of us also of people of, all faiths and no faith, as we say, opposed it because this was obviously a confront sort of to human decency, and it went against our basic image of our country, and it was discussed. But now, for many years now, I've been involved in a project that I'm going to talk to you about today, and hopefully I'll send some links about it and stuff later as well that can be distributed. And this is called the Sardari project. Now, Sardari is a very different entering of Iran to the story of the Holocaust than the denial done by the regime. Abdul Hussein Sardari was an Iranian diplomat based in France during the Second World War, where he used his diplomatic credentials that he initially had. He loses it, of course, when France is occupied, but he used the connections that he had to save a number of Iranian Jews from the Holocaust. And he does so by basically claiming to the Nazis that the Iranian Jews are, he sort of makes up actually a group. He says, they're not really Jews, they're Iranians who happen to practice a religion that is really like Jews. And he uses whatever he can to save them, give them Iranian passport and to save them. And our research in the Sardari project actually has shown since that Mr. Sardari wasn't alone. The Iranian diplomats across the board in different places helped rescue Iranian Jews from the Holocaust. And they did so because they were helping Iranian citizens, right, regardless of religion. And of course, Iranian Jews were the ones who were at the danger of being put in the Holocaust. So it got that. So the Sardari project was launched by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum jointly with Iranwire, which came together at some point. I was not quite there at the inception, but slightly a little later. But Iranwire is a website founded by Maziar Bahari, which of course is a prominent Iranian journalist who works on Iranian civil society and sort of countering regime narratives. So I think they discovered each other, the museum and Maziar, and they saw that Maziar and Iranwire had done work countering Holocaust denial already, and it's been a very nice marriage, if you will. So this work has continued in the Sardari project. And now the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum has done a tremendous amount of work in countering Holocaust denial, in pushing sort of promoting Holocaust education. Is by publishing material in Persian, obviously, tons of work has been translated, but publishing a lot of videos and interviewing experts of the museum. Some of the works, if I very briefly say that we've done, translated and published in Persian, for example, an illustrated version of Anne Frank's diary, a very well-known Holocaust story, of course. And also, what we've recently done is that we were able to acquire the diary of an Iranian Holocaust survivor, the only really known Iranian Holocaust survivor, Menashe Ezrapour, who was in France during the Holocaust and kept the diary. We were able to find his daughter, Karimiona, who very generously donated his diary to the museum, and we were working on it. We already had an interview with her, which was very well received. You can see it online. And we've also done some great collaboration with the museums, with the museum's Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies. We hosted, I think would be of interest to some of the academics and others in the room, we hosted a pioneering sort of a research workshop last year at the museum, where scholars from around the world, there were Israelis, Iranians, Europeans, Americans, Canadians, came together, and they offered, different works, sort of learned from each other, different works that they're doing that links Iran to the Holocaust in a variety of ways. And there's a second version of that in the works next year. I'm not sure we can declare it now. So next year there will be one in University of Toronto. Dr. Haywood, my colleague from the museum, is also here, and it's great to see her. So next year the University of Toronto will have a more elaborate version of that, hopefully made into an edited volume. And so I want to sort of end this here and sort of connecting it to the war is that I brought a little bit of my own personal story. As I said, anti-Israeli attitudes, sort of an anti-Semitic attitudes were really kind of relatively rare, I would say, in people of my age, relatively rare in Iran. And that sort of has remained the case in the last 2 years, even after October 7. But the regime has new forms of anti-Semitism that has been promoting. In fact, in the last couple of months, I would say that after the war, the state TV has really done stuff that are unprecedented. I have to preface that by saying a state TV in Iran is even extremist for the Iranian extremists. It's really run by the most extremist faction, but they've done a music video that called for uprooting of the Jews, and that's a direct quote. Khamenei in his speeches started directly referring to Jews, right? Not Zionists or whatever, using the word Jews, and a couple of others. And also, unfortunately, because the Israel's war on Gaza and then the war with Iran has more directly entered the Iranian political lexicon. Different regimes, different anti-regime political factions have sometimes closely sort of associated themselves with the war, and that has made it a more partisan issue than it was before. So I would say for those of us who are countering Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism, it leads to new challenges to be able to do this work, in this educational and sort of non-partisan way, and countering these new forms of anti-Semitism that unfortunately spring up. So I think I'll leave it there. I'm happy to sort of enter into more details.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your insights. Now we have Ambassador Dennis Rost. Welcome.
Thank you.
Ambassador Rost is a diplomat, author, and the Dermont Family Distinguished Professor of the Practice at the Georgetown Center for Jewish Civilizations. We would like to hear your remarks about this very timely topic, and the two other distinguished speakers here, they filled us in about some of the new or facts that happened in the 12 Days War. So we'd love to hear your opinion about it. Please, with any further ado, please welcome Ambassador Rost.
Thank you. Sorry to be late. Sometimes there's a mix-up in communications. We thought this started at 2:45. Obviously, it didn't. But I'm here. I'm glad to be here. And very interested in your comments. I want to talk about it from the standpoint of the war itself. Why did Israel strike when it did? What has been the effect of the war, both in the region but also some of the challenges I think it creates for the Iranians, for this regime. I'm not surprised that there's a kind of overreaction in the aftermath of this kind of a conflict, a kind of even greater nationalist zealotry. Doesn't surprise me, especially given, I think, what actually happened in the character of the 12 days of conflict. So let me start by asking, or basically asking the question, then answering it. Why did Israel strike when it did? I mean, there was supposedly that Saturday, 2 days after the war started, Steve Woodcock was supposed to have another negotiating round with the Iranians. Was the Trump administration part of a disinformation campaign? Very possibly. The timing was influenced, I think, mostly by an Israeli assessment. Iran had accumulated about 11 bombs worth of highly enriched uranium to 60%. Highly enriched uranium is measured at 20% or higher. They had 11 bombs worth enriched to 60%. To move from 60% to 90%, which is weapons grade, takes very little time. By the way, even with 60% enrichment, you could produce a bomb. You just couldn't produce 11 bombs worth. 60% would allow you to produce maybe 3 or 4 bombs, as opposed to if you have 90%, it would be around 11. To put again this in perspective, the Hiroshima bomb, which was a uranium-based enrichment bomb, was enriched to 80%. So 90%, one hears 90% is weapons grade. It's true it's weapons grade. It's just the most efficient weapons grade for producing a bomb. So Iran had 11 bombs worth at 60%. And there was a risk that at the rate it was accumulating about 9 kilograms a month. So this is kind of this meant that every 2 months, effectively, 2.5 months, they would have a new bomb. So the bombs were. So you're talking about an accumulation of a lot of material, which, given the scope of that stockpile, you could begin to divert it. And you might divert it to places that would be more well hidden or less certain for the Israelis to know it. And so there was clearly a concern, are we getting to the point where they will begin to be able to disperse this in a way where we may not know where all of it is? So that's one factor. If you ask me, was that the decisive factor? The answer is no. The decisive factor, I think, was the rate at which they were producing ballistic missiles of a range to hit Israel. Here, the Israelis looked at what they saw was a quicker ability to resume after Israel on the night of October 26th of 2024, had destroyed a lot of the Iranian ballistic missile producing capability. But they saw that what they had destroyed wasn't enough to prevent Iran from beginning to recoup very quickly. And the numbers that were projected by Israeli intelligence were that within 2 years, Iran would have 8,000 missiles capable of hitting Israel, capable of carrying a large payload. So there was a sense that Israel was approaching a point where if they didn't act soon, the consequences of not acting would present Israel with a very different kind of military challenge. I will say, Prime Minister Netanyahu, certainly prior to October 7th, 2023, was always characterized by risk aversion when it came to conflict. Now, I said risk aversion, I didn't say aversion to strong language, threatening language, but risk aversion in practice. Now, since October 7th, 2023, not immediately, but by the fall of 2024, with the operations against Hezbollah, you saw him acting in a very different way than he had before, number one. Number two, I can tell you, I was speaking to people in the Israeli security establishment before the strikes, and there was a debate going on there whether or not the Prime Minister would actually do this, authorize it. And the debate was in no small informed by their anticipation of the costs. the expectations of what Israel would lose in terms of fatalities, not wounded, but fatalities. The expectation was, given the scope of the existing missile capabilities, the expectation was Israel would lose 400 dead. That's phenomenal in the Israeli context. And for Bibi, given his historic risk aversion, the prospect of losing 400 dead plus a significant amount of property damage as well, that would be less impressive to him than the number of dead, would in the past have almost ensured he would not have acted. But this time he chose to act anyway, even though he saw what the expectations were. Now it turned out that the number killed were dramatically less. Instead of 400 dead, it was 31. The reason for that was the effectiveness of the Israeli strikes. I'll get into that in a second. Mostly the effectiveness of taking out the launchers. Israel destroyed 80% of the launchers. You can have a missile, but it has to be launched from a launcher. So Israel destroyed 80% of the launchers. Now these were all over Iran. And Israel basically used UAVs flying all over Iran to be able to find, identify, and take these out. Every time, by the way, they took out a launcher, you had 10 people, 10 Iranian security personnel are responsible for basically moving the launcher and preparing it to put the missile on it. So every time they hit one of these launchers, they took out the team of people associated with the launcher as well. I want to put this in some greater perspective by telling you, I was in Israel at the time. I was there a couple of days before, and I was there at least for the first 4 days of the war. And we were all collectively awakened at 3 a.m. on Thursday, June 13th. Why were we all collectively awakened at 3 a.m? Because the expectation of the Israelis was after they launched, there would be a big barrage in response. And you have about 10 minutes warning time. So everybody was awakened at 3 with the expectation there was going to be a big barrage. Nothing happened for 18 hours. And the reason nothing happened for 18 hours was because Israel decapitated most of the Israeli military, the Iranian military, and most of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. When I say decapitated, I'm talking about the senior officers responsible for being in control of what their response would be. So it was not just that decapitation, it was also the Iranians could not trust any of their communications. They couldn't trust if they were getting an order, it wasn't an order coming from the Israelis. The level of penetration, the level of the ability to be disruptive was such that it took the Iranians 18 hours to respond. By the way, that first day's response was the largest missile response during the course of the whole war. Each day, the number of missiles fired was reduced. The significance of taking out the launchers was actually greater even than the interception. Israel successfully intercepted 90% of those missiles they sought to intercept. I'm going to repeat that. Israel intercepted successfully 90% of the missiles they sought to intercept, which was exactly half of the total number of missiles that were launched. Because a lot of the missiles they didn't go after because they were going to fall in areas that were uninhabited. Doesn't mean there was no consequence, but it meant that the risk to strategic sites or to population, the radar, these are all, the missile defenses are, the brain of the missile defense is the radar. It governs everything. So once they know what the track is, then they choose either to intercept or they choose not to intercept. So Israel intercepted, with American help, because there was a THAAD missile defense battery deployed there, which was also quite effective. But there was a 90% interception rate of those they sought to intercept. Doesn't mean there wasn't damage, there was. Some of the pictures you see during the war speak to that. By the way, the Iranians were firing only at night. My own view as to why that was the case, I think for a while they thought maybe it was easier for them to be able to launch the launches at night because maybe it would be harder for the Israelis to track. But the drones have night vision capability, so that was never going to be a factor. I do think a factor was that the pictures of explosions are much more dramatic at night than they are in the daytime. And I think that helped to explain it. That also meant that during the daytime, after the second day, when you were in Israel, you were fairly free to move around and you didn't have that much to worry about, because it was basically only at night when there were launches. The missiles did carry very heavy payloads. You're talking about bombs a ton to a ton and a half. So when they're rockets fired by the Houthis, for example, you get a siren and you go to a safe room. And every apartment building has a safe room on every floor. These are not missiles that carry much payload. With these missiles, you didn't go to a safe room because if you hit the building, you wouldn't be safe. You actually had to go to the shelter. But because Israel's civil defense has been well practiced and developed over the years, that helps to explain, notwithstanding the 10% that penetrated with heavy payloads, it helps to explain why the actual number of those killed was much smaller than anticipated, but also much smaller than anticipated because of the effectiveness of Israel being able to take out the 80% of the launchers. Okay, so Iran, as you know, would claim great success, and is still claiming great success. They're saying Israel required the U.S. intervene, and that's the way the war was brought to an end, only because of that. Some people say to me, so you think they really believe that? And I would say the following. It is true, if you repeat something untrue enough, sometimes you come to believe it. And they certainly have done that. Do they fully believe what they're saying? Well, if they do, they're in deep trouble. They have to know better. For all those who say that the strikes and then what America did with its strikes, it's one-off strikes, I'll say something about those. So there were 3 targets that the U.S. hit. One, Fordo. Fordo, I know every one of you has heard the term bunker buster. It gets repeated all the time. It is completely erroneous. What the MOP, the massive ordnance penetrator, represents is not a bunker buster, it is a mountain buster. The Fordo is an enrichment site that was built into a mountain. And to be able to, and it's built into the base of the mountain, and to be able to destroy it, the U.S. created something called the massive ordnance penetrator, which is a 30,000-pound bomb that has a fuse that doesn't ignite until it's deep underground. It was built for one purpose only, so we could attack Fordo, so we had the option to attack Fordo without a nuclear device. The only way you can destroy a mountain in other circumstances is by using a nuclear weapon. We were never going to use a nuclear weapon, so we had to create a conventional weapon that could do this. Now, Israel does not have a plane big enough to carry a MOP. Over the years, starting back in 2015, I actually, as part of the JCPOA, to impress upon the Iranians that if they violated the agreement, what the consequences would be, I wanted us to give the Israelis the MOP and to lease them B-2 aircraft, or at least to rotate B-2 aircraft into Israel, because the B-2 and the B-52 are the only planes that can carry it. I can tell you, in the Trump administration, the decisions they made in terms of using the MOP on Fordo, they used 12 MOP overall. Earlier plans, I can tell you, would have been a fraction of that 12. So they hit the shafts. There are 2 shafts on each side of the mountain. These are highly precise strikes. 6 of these MOPs, for a total of 12 on each shaft, hit them. If you look at the before and after pictures of Fordo, you'll see the mountain now has a huge crater. No one knows for sure if the centrifuges that were at the base of Fordo were destroyed, but I will say this. Centrifuges are very delicate machines. They spin at about 700 miles an hour to separate out fissionable material. They separate out a minute amount. You have what are known as cascades of 164 centrifuges that are connected together, and they create, If you had only a single cascade, the amount that is separated out would be so small as to make it very difficult to build a weapon over time or to enrich enough fissionable material. With the cascades, you get what is it's more than a geometric increase. So in Fordo, you had a relatively small number. I mean, the vast majority of the centrifuges were in Natanz. We did hit Natanz and Isfahan as well. Israel hit Natanz and Isfahan as well. We didn't use MOP against Natanz or Isfahan. Natanz is where the vast majority of the centrifuges were, but you had about 3,000, less than 3,000 in Fordo. I said these are very delicate machines, so they spin very fast. In the past, there were, I'll just describe it this way, covert efforts to destroy them by creating surges in electricity. The surge in electricity would force the centrifuge to spin much faster, and once it did, it actually destroyed itself. Because these are so sensitive, it is inconceivable that the shock effect from the blast above would not have totally disrupted, shaken up, probably knocked over the centrifuges, which would be enough to destroy them. Nobody's gone in to determine the reality, but if anybody thinks that these centrifuges there survived it, think again. The significance of the strikes were also, I'll say, one technical, and then one I'll say is political psychological. The technical one of the American strikes is that combined with what Israel had done, and Israel did the vast majority, because Israel hit, these were the three sites we went after, but there are centrifuge assembly plants. There are all sorts of labs. Israel hit every site connected to the nuclear infrastructure program. So if you have a plant that is assembling different parts of a centrifuge, all those plants were taken out. There is no place where the Iranians were building, assembling, putting together centrifuges that wasn't destroyed, number one. Number two, for all the talk that we don't know, one of the things the Europeans were holding out on the issue of snapback sanctions was we don't know what is the fate of this 60% enriched material. I'm not sure the Iranians know the fate of it, because I think most of it was underground. And they seem to be acknowledging most of it is underground. One of the issues for the Europeans was to say, okay, we want you to give a reporting or access for the IEA to these areas. That wasn't agreed. Snapback functions, the snapback sanctions were snapped back. Anyway, the point is, every part of this program that could have been producing, whether it was uranium conversion of uranium ore, when you're talking about the fuel cycle, you're talking about mining uranium ore, converting it into yellow cake. I often said about the Iranians, they wanted their yellow cake and they wanted to eat it too. But this yellow cake then gets inserted into a centrifuge as a gas, and that's what gets enriched. That's what gets you separate out the fissionable material. So every single step in this cycle, in this basically, in this series of steps you would need to take in the fuel cycle, every single one of those at this point, the material, the facilities have been destroyed. Now there are those who will say that we don't, because we don't know the fate of the highly enriched uranium, Iran maybe squirreled it away and they could secretly go ahead and rush to a bomb. So let me pose the question to you. You're an Iranian scientist. Of the top 13 nuclear scientists who played the major role in this program, they're all dead. Okay? I'm sure there's a lot of Iranian nuclear scientists saying, yeah, I'll volunteer. I'll be the next one to sign up to do this. Probably not. Secondly, the Iranians clearly don't know what the Israelis know. And they are obviously, having arrested over 21,000 people, they're chasing Israeli ghosts right now. the effect of chasing these ghosts is they are unquestionably, maybe there's some that they're getting. I wouldn't doubt that there are some. But they're also arresting a lot of people who are probably playing a functional role for them in their security intelligence establishment. So they've disrupted, even now that's disrupted because they still don't know who they can trust. Thirdly, if you're Iran, you're really going to count on the fact that the Israelis don't know what you're doing? After this experience where, think of all the people they killed on day one, and even over the course of the 12 days, they continued to get more of the senior officials. So these were all people who were considered to be in secure and vulnerable places. But the Israelis got them all. So if you're the supreme leader, you're going to count on the idea that the Israelis don't know? I would say highly unlikely. So that's the kind of techno-political side of this. There's another side of this, though. Every American administration since Bush 43 has refrained from attacking Iran directly. Covertly, maybe, but not directly, not overtly. And I can tell you, when I came into the Obama administration, I was asked to chair a review of Iranian policy, of what our policy should be. And the first thing I learned in the discussions was how many American soldiers in Iraq had been killed by the Iranian proxy groups in Iraq. I'll just tell you, the casualties number well over 1,000. So I asked the question, why did we never respond directly against the Iranians? I mean, at a minimum, we know there were terrorist training camps around. Why did we never do that? This was the Bush administration, Bush 43, not exactly known for his restraint. And I was told because we did not want to expand the war. Now, Obama, then Trump won, then Biden. Iran, as you know, constantly said, if you attack us, we will set the whole region on fire. The U.S. will rule the day. And every administration took that seriously. And we, in the end, self-deterred. We created for the Iranians a degree of impunity. Now, what has happened is that impunity is gone. And they now know it's gone. All right, I don't want to overtake my time, and I'm probably close to doing so. But let
2
me,
minutes.
a few more minutes?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, all right, 2 minutes. I can do it. I can speak really fast. No, I'm kidding. But I'll do it in 2 minutes. I think that during the course of the war, there's little doubt that there was a kind of nationalist coalescence within Iran. There was. Attack from the outside, even those are highly critical of the Iranian regime, there was a nationalistic response to it. And when you look at Khamenei's early speeches, including on sure when he's speaking in it, and he said there's no religious symbolism, it's all Persian nationalism in terms of what he's drawing when he's speaking. So it says, a kind of interesting reflection. Having said that, I'll just say this, you have a regime that can't provide water to a public even during the worst days of summer. Can't provide electricity to a public even though it produces electricity, even though it produces natural gas and oil. Has a currency that is, what the official exchange rate is 42,000 real, and the actual exchange rate is 1,100,000. A currency that has no value. And you also have seen the regional proxy network in which Iran invested very heavily has been dramatically set back. Not to mention Syria, where they've been totally lost and they invested more than $40 billion. So if you have questions about what's going on in terms of this management and corruption within Iran, and you still see a regime pouring lots of money to the outside, it may not bring the regime down. I think the regime's mechanisms of control ensure that it is not about to fall. But for me, the point of maximum vulnerability in any authoritarian system is during succession, when the rules are not well established, and when there's a competition within the elite, including the elite that has the guns, and there is a tendency on the part of some in such circumstances to try to draw greater legitimacy by reaching out to the public to support. That'll be the point of maximum vulnerability, I think, for this regime. Does it mean that's going to be the end of it? No, not necessarily. But I will tell you, I have, as someone who was a student of the Soviet Union, I saw in the early 1980s the seeds of the regime not being able to sustain itself were there. I feel that Iran is very close to that. Does that mean it's going to disappear anytime soon? No, but if you ask me, will this regime be there in 20 years? I think highly unlikely.
20 years.
20 years. Thank you very much, Ambassador Dennis. And now join us from Iran, Professor Sadak Ziba Kalam, a retired professor of political science from Tehran University. We're just waiting a few minutes for the technology to
Catch up.
exactly. Can we do the next person if he's not ready? Yeah? The video? All right. And no, we have one more person, one video before the questions. So we have Lieutenant Cyrus Zahavi, and the founder and the director of Alma Research and Education Center, recorded video.
Hi, good morning. My name is Cyrus Zahavi. I'm the founder and president of the Alma Research and Education Center. I'm speaking to you from Israel. I live 9 kilometers from the Israeli-Lebanese border. This means, by the way, that I experienced the current war for 14 months until the ceasefire with Lebanon. Alma Center is all about open source information from Persian, Arabic, etc. And we publish a lot of information about the sites that actually Israel attacked during the 12 days war, about the IRGC. And I invite and I welcome everybody to check our website and to see what we publish, also about Hezbollah, Syria. To talk about Rising Lion and the implications about connections and relationship between Israel and Iran and the Middle East. First, I want to try just to make sure we all remember a little bit about the information and what was it all about, what exactly happened. Israel was preparing for this operation for at least a decade, maybe more. Ever since we understood that Iran has a nuclear program, we understood that maybe one day we will have to attack it. This was like the fulfilling of a dream and the fulfilling of a nightmare at the same time, because we were preparing for that for a long time. But at the same time, we knew that the Iranian response will be harsh and difficult. We knew that the damages of the ballistic missiles can eliminate neighborhoods, just as actually happened. And we didn't know how many casualties we're going to have. In Israel, the assessments were that we will have hundreds of casualties. And yet, even though these were the assessments, the Israeli leadership decided to open this operation and to go for it, because we understood that Iran gaining a nuclear weapon and Iran gaining thousands of ballistic missiles is much more dangerous than having the operation at the timing that eventually was chosen. During those 12 days, Iran launched more than 500 ballistic missiles to Israel. About 10% hit centers of population. Very quickly, Iran started to focus to target the missiles towards neighborhoods, towards crowded neighborhoods and buildings in various places, and also the hospital in Beersheba. We had 86% of success in intercepting those missiles, and yet, as you could see, neighborhoods were eliminated. We had almost 15,000 Israelis that lost their homes, that couldn't live there and needed to fix their homes. We had about 30 casualties and 1,400 people who were wounded. Iran also launched drones. By the way, the drones were launched not only from Iran, but also from Iraq and from Syria. About 1,000 drones were launched, 99% of success in intercepting them. This is phenomenal. Only one hit in one of those towns in northern Israel. It's very interesting to see that, as I've mentioned, the Iraqis joined in, militias in Syria joined in, the Houthis of Yemen, until today, they are part of the campaign against Israel, while Hezbollah was cultivated for years as the leading proxy against Israel, as the one who was supposed to be the shield of the nuclear program of Iran, didn't join in. And I believe it didn't join in because there was an understanding between Iran and Hezbollah that it's not worth it to risk Hezbollah while the government of Iran will survive this. I believe that they knew that Israel is not after the Iranian administration, the Iranian regime. And I believe that Hezbollah, the mission of Hezbollah today is to recover the damages that it suffered from Israel and not to further endanger it. And that's why I didn't join in. And yet, many people in Israel were surprised by that because we got used to saying that the mission of Hezbollah is to protect the nuclear facilities of Iran, and it didn't happen. Israel succeeded in eliminating 65% of the launchers of the ballistic missiles. We don't have information of exactly how many missiles were destroyed, but we understand that there were a lot of infrastructures of the missiles that were destroyed. We know some of those places, many of them in western Iran. We could see this also when we analyzed the launching of those missiles, and we saw that Iran could not launch tens of missiles at the same time or hundreds of missiles at the same time as it planned because of the hunting of the Israeli Air Force against those launchers and the free corridor that we actually had in Iranian skies to hound those launchers. 90% of the nuclear facilities were severely damaged, including Natanz and Isfahan. Israel also eliminated 10 nuclear scientists that were the key brain behind the program. Israel destroyed the military leadership of Iran from the head chief of staff, the head of the IRGC, the intelligence commanders, and Air Force commanders. And we succeeded in neutralizing almost completely the air defense systems of Iran. I think that this operation completely changed the Middle East. I think it made the Middle East a better place, a safer place. I think that it made the world a safer place. And I think that today we only starting, and maybe even specifically today with everything that is happening in New York, we're only starting to understand the implications of this campaign against Iran. Because Iran was like an octopus that is operating proxy militias all over the Middle East that is deterring what we call the other side, which are the Muslim Sunni states of the Middle East. And Israel exposed that it was much weaker than we thought, and that we can actually severely damage and put the regime itself of the Islamic Republic at risk. Look, I know there was a debate about the nuclear program damages, whether Iran can recover. Of course, we've already seen evidence that Iran has started to recover. How long it's going to take until it will recover? I personally believe that the damages are huge, that it will take at least a few years for Iran to recover. The operation was really amazing, and I think that the importance of this operation is not only with the fact of the de facto damage to this program, but actually with the implications, what we call soft implications of the situation of the Middle East, the understanding of the different players in the Middle East, that we can actually stop this, that Israel can actually stop this, and that there is no reason, by the way, that Israel will do it by herself. I think that below the radar, Israel wish that part of the implications of this operation will be the undermine the stability of the regime, maybe pushing, helping a little bit to the forces of opposition inside Iran to finish the job by themselves. I don't think that Israel tried or Israel is willing to replace the opposition of the Iranian people and actually to overthrow the regime completely. But I do believe that there was a hope that what we are doing will set the ground for a popular revolt against the Islamic Republic. It didn't happen until now. I truly hope it will happen in the future. And actually, I think that one of the reasons it didn't happen is because Israel operated almost by itself with very limited and very targeted American assistance. What I want to see, and this connects me to look a little bit forward, is with the snapback that was just decided upon in the UN, a complete diplomatic isolation of Iran. I want to see support of the international community to the Iranian people that will enable it never to revolt, eventually to revolt against its evil government. And I, first and foremost, want to see adherence to the cause. If there will be sanctions and nobody will enforce them, they will be ineffective. If there will be sanctions and only half of the world will enforce them, and the other half, like Russia, like China, like North Korea, will continue to collaborate with Iran, the money will continue to flow into Iran, and it will be difficult to actually achieve anything. Which brings me to my second point. To tell you the truth, we've seen this in the past. I am not sure. I am positive that Iran will continue to refuse. I am positive that Iran will not surrender. I am positive that Iran will take the budgets that were meant to go to building the infrastructures of Iran with regard to electricity and with regard to water and with regard to progress of the state for the benefit of its people. And the Islamic Republic will continue to invest this money in its nuclear program, in its proxies in the Middle East, in its ballistic missiles program. It's not going to end. It will end only when the Islamic Republic will fall. So on the one hand, I'm very happy for the decision this week of the snapback in the UN, but on the other hand, I do understand the limitations of this decision, and I don't think it will be 100% effective against what we want to achieve. This brings me to talk about the ideology of the Islamic Republic, and I think that we shouldn't forget the ideology is an ideology of the destruction of the State of Israel. The Islamic Republic views the State of Israel as the small devil, while the United States is considered the big devil. There is no true base for a dialogue or for relationship as long as this is the case. And that's why I think that the only solution, if we talk about solutions, I prefer processes, is when eventually this regime will fall. The Israeli operation was targeted. The Israeli operation was limited. As I've said, we operated, we knew that we want to get the result of undermining the regime, but we didn't think that we will completely overthrow it. This is something that the Iranian people should do. Iran continues to support, finance, and arm its proxies in the Middle East. With all the economic difficulties, this is still happening. It is happening with Hezbollah. It is happening in Yemen. It is happening with the militias in Iraq. It is happening also with the providers of arms to West Bank, to Gaza, and maybe even to Hamas, and to Hamas in Gaza. And that's why, again, I think that the only way to win against this is to unite against this. This is not just the mission of Israel. It's the mission of Israel. It's the mission of our neighbors in the Middle East. It's the mission of our Arab neighbors, and it's the mission of the international community. The tactics of Iran in the negotiation is negotiation forever. I think we've seen this for 20 years. It's been more than 20 years since the nuclear program of Iran was exposed by the Iranian opposition, and the mission was to continue the negotiation and meanwhile to continue to build its nuclear program, and later on it was added with the ballistic missiles program. And this was true 20 years ago. This is true for today, and that's why I was very happy that President Trump talked about a deadline and eventually supported Israel when this deadline has ended. And I believe that with the snapback, it should be the same. The snapback by itself is not a target. The snapback is supposed to be a mean to achieve something. If it doesn't achieve what it should achieve, and Iran will continue to enrich uranium, we should consider what to do around that. I want to say one last point about the collaboration between Iran and Russia. This is very important to emphasize. Iran provided UAVs to Russia that attacked in Ukraine. Those UAVs were provided, by the way, to Venezuela in a way that posed a threat to Miami. It's within their range. And this collaboration can also bypass the sanctions and bypass the snapback. And I think we should not ignore when this will happen, and it will happen. The collaboration, and especially military collaboration between Iran and Russia, may continue with everything that is happening, and we should not ignore it. We should make sure that it's not happening. Today, Iran is much more isolated than it used to be. I think that Europe understood with the reports of the progress of the nuclear program and the enrichment of uranium to, I don't know, above 60%. Everybody understood that the nuclear program is not about civilian purposes. And today, everybody understood that Israel was right with what it had done. I do want to believe that, again, in the future, we will not have to operate alone anymore. That in the skies of Iran, bombing those dangerous facilities, we will see the jets of France, we will see the jet of Britain, we will see any other countries that do believe in peace and want to take this dangerous threat out will join us. I think that what happened in Syria is very important to mention here as well, because this is part of the change of the Middle East that I was talking about. The Shiite axis that went through Syria into Lebanon doesn't exist anymore. There is a regime change in Syria. There are different risks around that. I'm not going to elaborate here, but we'll see what will happen today or tonight. But at the same time, the fact that Iran can no longer transfer convoys of trucks loaded with rockets to Hezbollah, this is very important to the overall new Middle East that everybody is talking about specifically today. I also think that Israel demonstrated that, and this connects me to October 7th and everything that happened in the past 2 years in Israel. Israel have proven that we are not going to disappear. We are here to stay. We do have the capability to defend ourselves during war in various fronts with various threats. with very impressive military operations. I think this is very important because this demonstration actually opened a window of opportunities to new relationships in the Middle East. And again, I truly hope that we will see that in the next 24 hours, a few days. I will leave it here. I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you today. You're all welcome to contact me if you have any more questions and to continue the discussion on a different platform. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sadat apologizes for not being able to communicate with us given some difficult technology difficulties because he was supposed to be joining us from Tehran. So with that, we will open the floor for a few questions as we're running a little bit out of time here. And I would like to start with Roy.
Thank you very much. This has been a very wonderful panel. I want to ask Ambassador Ross a question that you may not be able to answer, but I'll ask nonetheless. What was the reason behind Israel bombing Eden prison in Tehran during the war?
It's too bad you don't have the Israeli representative for now.
I meant to ask her, but she's gone.
I don't know. I presume the reason.
Here, and I would like to start with
Bomb the prison in a way that would allow people to escape. I have to say, looking at the actual damage.
Thank you very much. This has been a very wonderful panel. I want to ask Ambassador Ross a question that you may not be able to answer, but I'll ask it nonetheless. What was the reason behind Israel bombing Eden prison during the war?
It's too bad you don't have the Israeli representative for now.
I meant to ask her, but she's gone.
I don't know. I presume the reason was to bomb the prison in a way that would allow people to escape. I have to say, looking at the actual damage, it looks like a self-defeating operation. It didn't make very much sense to me.
Do you have any idea who might have encouraged or advocated for such bombing?
The Prime Minister
Thank you for participating in the panel. I was wondering if anybody on the panel can answer this question. There's been huge amounts of publicity about all the things that were recounted by the speakers in terms of the damage to Iran and its nuclear program. Is there any evidence that the Iranians targeted and or successfully attacked the Israeli nuclear program?
Someone who's been a student of the Middle East and a practitioner in it for a long time. One thing I can tell you is many of the countries in the region create mythologies that bear little relationship to reality. They claim great victories when they've suffered defeats. This is not unique to the Iranians, but it certainly characterizes their current behavior. They did not inflict any damage on the Israeli nuclear program.
Thank you very much for an excellent panel. I have two brief questions. To Alex, I agree with you as opposed to others because I think that this posture of Iran is as having a reformist government and whatnot has been just a posture, right? That witness the fact that it's still here. Thank you.
Look,
So I am wondering if, and I want
but I
to
also
ask
think,
Ambassador that
also,
whether or not you think the existence of the Iranian regime is to the benefit of the United States.
yes, go back to the Iranian conflict, go back to Jim Carter. Like, question, a lot of people seem to in the region think that's the case. I think all of us have heard the theories that, particularly in Gulf states, that you have Iran the way it is, you're forcing countries, particularly the wealthy ones, to go and buy American military equipment. So that is to those Soviets, right? Something along those lines has happened many times. I would say after the Cold War ends in '91, yes, the sort of value of Iran as a piece of real estate dropped significantly for the United States. But I also think going forward now with China rising, again, if you are the United States, do you really want to give this piece of real estate to the Chinese or to the Russians? So I actually think you could make the counter argument that it is in the interest of the United States to have an Iran that you have relations with, that Iran is not a spoiler country that undermines American interests.
I'm so sorry, but I just interrupt you for 1 second, please. So the Iranian people have shown again and again their agency, right? And giving a lot of sort of sacrifice, doing it. Why hasn't the United States jumped in to support them? Not to support them.
Right, that's a great question.
Because you know what the regime has done, right?
Right.
I mean, the people are suffering.
Right, no, absolutely true. I couldn't agree more, but I can also tell you, I have lived now in Washington 19 years, and I have never seen an American policy on Iran that to me looked like serious and about regime change. I haven't seen it. I don't think it exists today. And that's something, you should pose to American politicians, say, hang on a minute, you've been complaining about Iran for half a century, and you really don't have a serious policy, as opposed to kicking the can down the road.
Ambassador can.
Sure. I'll just say briefly about the evidence track. I should say something that I think it would be studied for sort of many years to come. I'm really afraid that it was partially basically done for Instagram. And I'm not joking. I think these kind of symbolic things that you can put immediately on social media and stuff has become a real conversation. So it appeared to be because it was very immediately sort of advertised that way and pushed. So it's worrying if that's the case, but we'll see. But I'll just say something briefly about about this sort of topic we were talking about a little bit. So I'll say two things quickly. First of all, I think the differences between different factions of the regime are real. As I said, they're based on material interest, and I have evidence for it. So I invite, with my work in the Atlantic and other places, I write a lot about it. I speak to these guys publicly. They're on the code. And I think, as I said, they're based on material interests because these people want. I'm not saying they're good people, or to be clear, I'm not saying any of them are committed to democracy. Of the sort of real power equivalent in Iran. They're not committed to democracy, but they are committed to a pro-West policy. Or let's say a West-facing policy. They want to get rid of Iran's. They hate Russia and China very openly, and they talk about it, right? Actually, the kind of Russia skepticism that you hear on from Iranian reformists or centrists is kind of crazy. Like you don't really actually hear it as much in here sometimes, right? So if you listen to these people, but Ella Kulai is a good answer. She recently just gave a very public interview. This is an old reformist sort of thing. She's done her PhD on the part of the Soviet Union. And she basically said, if Iran wants the path of freedom, it must face waste. And if it allies itself with Russia, it won't get it. So these are very sort of real currents that exist in Iran. And I would say about the opposition, I'm a Democrat. I mean, I'm someone who wants democracy in Iran, obviously, and I support democratization, and that means the fall of the Islamic Republic, which is an authoritarian regime by its very nature. But the question of how we can get there is interesting, and there are various paths. To the question of why do Americans not help us? I think one of the things that was shown in the last war, and I think we should be more serious about it, is that it's not that there was a failure of the Iranian opposition. it was the absolute absence of the Iranian opposition.
Oh.
There was no serious, of course, there was no popular revolt as had been sort of promised at the time of the attacks, as a lot of us had said. A lot of supported all the past protest movements in 2017, in 2019, in 2022, and 2023, that an Israeli attack will not be conducive to the conditions. For a basic reason that if you're dying in bombs, you're not the ones who are going to go outside to protest. And so that's on the level of popular initiative. That will take a tremendous popular initiative to bring down the regime, but also political opposition, i.e. an alternative, is entirely absent. The Iranian opposition has failed to bring up anything like an alternative to this regime. And that explains the longevity of the Islamic Republic. Of course, this failure has to do with Islamic Republic's repression, right? It has a lot to do with the fact that any three people who want to get together in Iran, they're repressed. They're repressed inside Iran, and outside Iran, they're sort of disrupted in a variety of ways. But that's very important to recognize. So if you want the regime to go, who's going to have to come replace it? Actually, you say American support.
I think the Pahlavi regime is a very, very.
Sure. So it's.
I remember. I give if.
Okay, so I'll let me. Yeah, I'll just say the same. So I understand some folks support Mr. Pahlavi as an origin figure, but he does not have an organization behind him.
Yes.
He does not have, he does not have popular support in my opinion. He has some popular support, but I think if you polled in Iran, 15 to 20% of people will be supporters. Some other will be more tacit supporters. But anyways, support doesn't translate into actual effective politics unless you're able to build organization, networks, and others. It's very important to realize not only they have the Iranian opposition, and us, I have to say, as some part of it, not only we haven't built an effective thing that could have gone. You haven't done anything. There's no organization. There's no organization today that can say, I represent, not 50 million Iranians. I represent 10,000 Iranians, 20,000. Is there one person who can say, I'm voted in by 10,000 Iranians somewhere out of the millions abroad? Unfortunately, there isn't. So that's going to take any job of democratization very difficult.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple things. One, the point you're making is really important. Because we haven't, in the US, we haven't seen either an organization on the inside, and for reasons that it's pretty hard to organize on the inside because you get arrested, you get brutalized, you get killed. So this is a regime that is quite determined to kill to preserve itself in power, and that makes it hard to organize on the inside. But that doesn't explain why there's no effective organization on the outside. The absence of effective organization on the outside, you have multiple Iranian groups. They're not, every time there's been an effort made to get the Iranians on the outside to cooperate, it has failed. So you want the US administration, when it doesn't see coherence on the outside, which by itself shouldn't be enough, and it doesn't necessarily know who it could, how and in what ways it could work on the inside, that creates a kind of hesitancy for sure. Now there's a deeper factor as well, which is we have a really bad history in terms of dealing with regime change. We're just not good at it. And every time you fail, it makes you less willing to think about trying again. So the idea that if we would just support the Iranians on the inside, everything would be fine, that has no saliency prior to the Trump administration. And I would guess because President Trump is all about deals, he's about deals with those who exist, not about people who aren't there. So the answer, I think, is twofold. One, our own hesitancy given history, but also the lack of any clear Iranian organization that you could work with that might be practical.
Thank you very much. I know there are so many questions, but we are running out of time. The gentleman over there, he
I have so much input,
She did have her hand up from
Yes.
Anyway,
Can I ask a
two quick questions.
Yeah,
One
can I ask
from
you
there,
a question?
and that's it.
Can I speak freely?
Always.
Please, we are in a free country.
Because we are under Mr. Trump's administration. So I just want to, I'm from Afghanistan, so I criticize always Iran and especially anti-Afghan immigrants behavior that Iranians and Iran government they have. But I do believe also that Western countries, they don't know mentality of Iranian people so far. Even Western countries and US, they know a lot about many strategies, but they don't know about the amount of love that Iranians they have for their land. When they ask for help with women life freedom movement, and when women of Iran they went to, yeah, I just asked it, when they went to the streets, when they were killed, but America and Western countries they didn't help those women, and they brought changes among like their society. They came to streets without a scar. And how it is possible that America and US and Western countries, they are bringing to Afghanistan Taliban a totally anti-woman, anti-democracy regime, and they are advocating for like overturning like Iran, how these two faces like somehow play is working. I don't understand it. We are supporting every time Taliban. Every week, US is sending almost $40 million to Afghanistan to oppress women of Afghanistan, and then you are also giving a lot of money like to take over like another like so-called Taliban. I want to, Mr. Ambassador, can you explain for me, for my generation, that why you have your country and your strategies have two faces?
Thank you very much. My question is more direct for Ambassador Ross. So you talked about the implications, long-term implications of this obviously military event for Iran, for the Islamic Republic, which I totally agree with. I think the only thing I wanted to ask was from the other side, what do you think the long-term cost of this would be for the Israeli government, especially for the Netanyahu?
Thank you. Endless war.
So I never had any role in the making of our policy towards Afghanistan. I think the outcome could not have been worse. Whatever the strategy was, which seemed to be shaped over the years by a set of measurements or objectives that were too narrow and too technical. The net result of this is, in my mind, not defensible. I can't defend how we ended up and what we did. I can't defend how we got out. I thought it was a mistake at the time. Isn't to say I didn't think that we should stay there forever, but the way we got out guaranteed the worst of all outcomes. So I'm not going to sit here and say to you and explain a policy I had no hand in shaping and disagreed with what it was in the end. You talk about this being a free country, so I'm free to disagree with what we did. On the problem I have with what I've described as an extraordinary military success of the Israelis. Really, what was done, I had one leader from the Gulf say to me they were in awe of what the Israelis did militarily and intelligence. But I wrote an article at one point where I said, Clausewitz talked about war being the extension of politics by other means, which means the military in war is an instrument. It's not an end in itself. It is the absence of a political strategy that has come to haunt the Israelis right now. And we see now President Trump calling on work that has been done mostly behind the scenes for the better part of the last year, coming up with a 21-point plan, which is an effort to take what was done militarily and translate it politically. I'm sure he agreed, and I'm sure that the negotiations on it have just begun. The details will have to be negotiated. Prime Minister, I have an article in the Washington Post today where I said Prime Minister Netanyahu is a master at saying yes, but, and the devil is in the details. And to be fair, by the way, he's right. The devil will be in these details. The outcome in Gaza has to be Hamas has no control, directly or indirectly, and Hamas is not in a position to reconstitute itself. So this is the plan that calls for the phased withdrawal, for the end of the war, and the phased withdrawal of the IDF, and the phase in of what will be this interim international regional administration. Working out those details, to be fair, will not be simple. Where is the IDF operating? When do others come in? What do they need to be able to come in? What do they require from the Israelis? What do the Israelis require from them? Those are real issues to be negotiated. What is the mechanism to prevent smuggling? I used to go into Gaza all the time. I did go into one of the tunnels. And the amount of material that people would say that Gaza was an open-air prison, it was not an open-air prison for Hamas. They got whatever they needed in terms of military capability, but also these tunnels use tons and tons of cement, tons and tons of metal and piping. And all this could have been used above ground in Gaza. So what are the mechanisms to ensure that the smuggling will stop? What are the mechanisms to ensure Hamas can't reconstitute itself? These really do have to be negotiated. And the question will be, given Bibi Netanyahu's politics, the politics of the coalition, is this a serious negotiation to get this implemented, or is it a negotiation to avoid implementation? I suspect that President Trump probably wants this to be done really quickly. His desire for it being done really quickly and the need to actually do it practically are things that will have to be reconciled. But I do think where we are right now is at a different point. It remains to be seen whether what is a general outline can be translated into very practical, tangible steps.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank our esteemed speakers for their inputs and very informative information that enriched our mind and our thoughts about what's happened and what's going to be happening, if you can imagine. I apologize for the people who wanted to ask questions, but we're on very short of time. I would like to thank you all for being here, the organizer for organizing such an important and timely conference, and I'm glad we had gathered here today to actually shed a light on a very important topic. So I would like to thank you all and thank our speakers again. And